Alright, Theo, tell us about this wonderful automobile that we've managed to somehow find ourselves in.
Wonderful.
On this fine sunny day.
On these wonderfully
in this lovely area
unsealed South Australian roads, or rather. It's so, first thing you notice with this Outlander is the suspension, or rather, on a road like this, you know exactly what's connecting you to the road, and in this car, well, that's not something you should be proud of.
It's got some grunt.
The 2.4 litre engine does have a fair bit of grunt, and I will say it's not the most offensive CVT I've driven. It actually is relatively inoffensive for a CVT. It's not like, say, an X-Trail or a RAV4 CVT or that Voxio one-zone CVT. It doesn't sound like a strangled mule. Good.
Does it sound like when you get on it, do you feel like the gearbox, it revs to 3,000-4,000 RPM and then the revs just sit there? Or do they actually drop down and actually feel like they're actually changing?
Well, it's holding between 2, 5 and 3. So that's obviously where they've picked it. It's been designed, like the older Outlanders we fixed up, it's been designed for highway cruising. So I can understand why.
Because the Civic, it's between 2 and 3. It just like, sorry, 3 and 4. It just sits there. Whenever you change gear, the revs don't drop. It just stays there and just groans.
Yeah, this doesn't groan.
It's really terrible.
This is more steps. The Mitsubishi CVT is a step type CVT, so it does sort of have like a gearing set up to it and does move, but it is a rubber band effectively. It's not like one speed arbitrary gear CVT like some of the others are. It's a step one. But the one thing that really annoys me with the engine is this disconnect feel. The gearbox is robbing power from the engine. I just think if this was a manual, it'd be a lot better. I know the manual ones, these are rare as hen's teeth, but I'd go fish one out. Because really, this is a bloody CVT.
A Caravel?
That is a Caravel. that is a vehicle that I would like to own at some point.
Well, something that we have a bit of an interest in.
Yes, old European cars.
Caravel versus Serena.
What's shitter, a Caravel or a Serena? Agreed.
One day, Theo.
One day, well, maybe not that far away from me. That or another shitbox car. But again,
Nimbus.
Yeah, Nimbus. But actually, in all fairness, this isn't an offensive car to drive. It's not horrible to drive in the way that you would think some of these cars would be. But I do wish gearbox being hated. Can they? I'd rather than put a torque converter in. But again, I'd rather drive. If this was a manual, it would improve it. Another thing that I think would improve this car is, of course, the suspension. Those rear shock absorbers from the factory are rubbish. It's bouncy over bumps, and when it's on an off-camber surface or an undulated surface, you really feel it. And it also probably could do with better anti-roll bars, because the thing's got body roll in it. It just wobbles and jiggles around. And yes, I know it's a Lancer that they've jacked up. Come on!
Yeah, it's not far from being a good car. Like, there's not, apart from those things, there's not really a lot else you can really say like badly about it.
And you feel the thing's it's trying to plow. It tries to plow. It feels like again, I get the feeling the manual, which is lighter than this, is going to turn better, but I also get the feel that the four-wheel drive Outlander, probably again heavy, which this one is heavier, so two-wheel drive manual probably is going to turn better than this, if I had to guess. But I've never driven, although I'd like to now.
Yeah,
but
one day hopefully. Yeah,
the anti-roll bars, front suspension, it just, I know it is built to a price, but it annoys me.
And the other thing on the suspension, Theo, speed humps. And just even just little divots in the road. Like for an SUV, like you think, oh yeah, the car will just sort of amble across it and it won't be disrupted at all. But
Boing!
You feel everything. Oh, you feel... It's like the 156, except double the size and with the suspension 100,000 kilometers newer.
This is a road that in the Peugeot ironed out all the bumps here, whereas in this,
everything.
But you could forgive it, considering what it was worth new at $34,000 for what you got. You could forgive that. It wasn't a brilliant car, but you weren't paying brilliant car money for a car of this size. You were paying reasonable money for a not so brilliant car. I mean, still not the best car in its class, but it wasn't, for the space dollar feature equation, it made a lot of sense. So you could forgive the fact that, yeah, okay, it drove ordinary, but it didn't, everything else seemed to add up on the car when it was new in 2020, pre all the COVID values. Because what is surprising, like that GLA 180 we've reviewed, this is worth more now than it was worth new. 50,000 Ks, car like this, a 2020 ES all-wheel drive is worth $37,000. It was $34,690 new. Let that sink in.
So with the GLA, you put 25,000 Ks in that car, and want to sell it later on, 3 years later, you actually make $5,000.
In this, you'd make money too.
This car, you make $3,000, but you've driven 50,000.
You drive 18. If you bought an
That's
ES,
crazy.
If you bought an ES in 2020 and drove 18,000 Ks on it, you could sell it for $40,000. Now, that's probably because there is a wait list for these cars, but also it is Karen Central. It's a proper Karen car. While our older cars, their styling is particularly distinctive. You know where they're coming from. You can see them. They've got some interesting design features to them. This is not the most interesting car to look at. It's pretty bland. Its dashboard is just one big lump. They've taken the inspiration from a Jeep from the 80s and the 90s, the old XJ Cherokee, this big lump. With a Jeep, it felt like it was cut out of a wheelie bin, and this car's a lot better, obviously. But yeah, it feels like inspiration in terms of cockpit. Not my favourite Mitsubishi cockpit.
Yeah, it's like they couldn't really be bothered. It's just sort of like, what's acceptable? Yeah, we'll put that in there. Something that will just be
Mitsubishi
normal.
in their financial status, it wasn't especially brilliant. Still, this is before Nissan bought a share in them. This car was launched in 2012, and again, it was designed on a budget of, like the other car, $2.50. It wasn't designed with a lot. This corner, God, I feel it understeering.
That's what's calling your attention.
It's pulling me.
It's prevented you from being able to speak there.
It's understeering. It just,
oh my god.
Again.
There's giant big purple pillars on either side of the freeway to keep you in line with the road. Prevent you from going over the barriers.
We are in Adelaide. Gee, there's some interesting stuff here. And this is...
It's like it's trying to tell you, we know you've got understeer, but try your hardest to keep on the road. Otherwise, you'll go over the barrier and you'll die.
The problem is, this car on paper, when it was new, made sense. Features, space, economy, performance, on paper, makes sense. The problem is, if you drive it, and you drive it over anything other than a billiard table, you'll see these shortcomings. The steering, there's too much understeer, particularly on a straight corner where there's no elevation changes or bumps. It's okay. But when you add elevation changes, bumps, anything that you'll find on a normal road in Adelaide, the handling is sloppy. As is the suspension. You just think, I know it's cheap, but you can do better than this, Mitsubishi. Then again, The other car, the reason the red car and the other one that we have are in decent shape is because I've gone through them and fixed up the suspension on them. This is the original one, and one thing I'll say, if you do buy one of these cars, invest in better dampers, invest in better control arms, invest in better springs, invest in better anti-roll bars. I know they're a little bit of money, but you will see a marked difference. And invest in a good set of tyres, because the Michelin's made the red car sing. Because when I first drove it to the video, it wasn't the best of shape, but
no, it was in quite poor shape actually.
The red car, once we stuck Michelin's and good tyres on it, and good suspension, it drove really well. Same goes for this. If we gave one of these our treatment, it would be a better car. No question about it.
Yeah,
it's just
100%.
it's just that to procure one in banger shape, you have to spend a lot of money to procure a rough one, and that to me is, again, means we're not going to be turning a ZL, but maybe an early ZJ we might fix up and see what it turns out as. But even so, this has the ingredients for a decent car. It just hasn't been executed properly. It's been executed cheaply because the company at the time making it didn't have the money to make it better. The engine is smooth, and given Mitsubishi's history of four-cylinder engines, that doesn't come as any surprise, given it is the company that invented the counter-rotating balance shaft, which made these engines made four-cylinder engines smooth and refined. So good that Mitsubishi patented it and others were paying them for the technology. So as an engine, this engine's really smooth. But it just needs... If this car was a manual, this car had better steering, it had better suspension and better tyres, I'd probably think highly of it for what it is.
Yeah.
But because all the interface is easy, it's all simple to work, although this ES has no less than 9 blanked out switches to tell you you're in the base model. You're in the base model, buddy. You should have paid a little extra. Because I got what, 4
well, at least one of those blanked out switches aren't air conditioning.
At least it has air conditioning.
Yeah.
At least it does.
Oh.
More than can be said for some of our cars.
Oh. Oh.
Yeah. Serena, no aircon.
Oh god, that's so funny.
Oh, the fact
$700 for air conditioning? No.
Madame Penny Pincher didn't put air conditioning in her Serena.
You're already paying 40 grand for that car.
Well, she wouldn't have paid 40 back in 1994 when she bought it.
Nah.
She would have been... We know people like this. She would have seen, oh, it's a good deal. It would have been like 30 something. They would have knocked off a shit ton off the price. But driving this Outlander, you get the impression that it's okay. It's adequate. It's good enough. Which is why you see them everywhere in South Australia. Because that's what they want. A car that is good enough. Okay. Mind you, I did see these where I used to live, which is SA's equivalent to Frankston, with women buying them who looked like they were single and looked like they'd ripped off their second husband. 3 kids, 2 different men. Divorce settlement number 1 bought an ASX, divorce settlement number 2 bought an Outlander. That kind of sums up where these cars are going to end up, where these end up in South Australia at the very least.
You know what bothers me the most?
Yeah?
Is that for 34 grand, it's kind of, unfortunately, it's kind of the standard. Car makers, it's just what they do with the suspension being sloshy and having understeer. It's just, I don't know.
It wasn't.
If you want something good, you have to pay more than 34. You need to pay upwards of 40 grand.
When we had a car industry, that wasn't the case.
Yeah.
Falcon, Commodore, base cars drove well. Holden even benchmarked the E39 5 Series, one of the best handling saloon cars of its genre for the VE Commodore. And the FG and BA, BF Falcons with the independent rear end drove really well. Same with Magna. Even the bloody Camry drove better. And that's what is upsetting, because we could buy a car that drove well for this sort of money, but people didn't. People's standards obviously dropped. They wanted an SUV, even though it's smaller than the sedans that they were buying. Okay, with the seats down it carries a lot, but seats up.
Yeah, you really can't fit much in the back.
This car carries a lot if it seats down, but seats up. And with 7 seats up, you have no carrying capacity at all. But the quality in the fittings are ordinary, but they're not offensive. They're average. It's an average car. It's a very average car to drive. It's an average car to look at. But that's not what I would buy. I don't like average cars. They don't try hard enough. For 34 grand, you and I wouldn't buy one of these.
No.
$34,000, I can think of any number of E-Class Mercedes-Benz I would buy. Heck, I'd buy a 5 Series over this.
And that's why we'll always go back to choosing second-hand cars that may originally have been more than this $34,000, but over time suffering from depreciation, and then actually putting them within our range, within the budget of what we can afford, and then experiencing the joy that those cars have to offer.
They drive better, even though they're more expensive to run. They drive a lot better.
Yeah, but you can really get them at the fraction of the price, though. Like,
well, heck, my 97 E-Class drives better.
Yeah, you're not going to even pay half the amount of this thing for one of those.
Over these bumps, my E-Class would smoothen this out to a reasonable degree.
Just sail over them.
Same with your Alpha. Heck, I'd buy one of my BMWs over this.
No, to be fair, the Alpha wouldn't sail over bumps, but my car's just amazing. It's just that amazing. I don't really care. Like,
I'd buy one of the BMs over this old BM E46. If I needed a practical SUV for this money, it's an okay buy. Although I'd probably be tempted to buy a 6-cylinder Pajero instead of this, quietly. Because at least that car can go anywhere. This is a soft roader. You're driving over like you're driving over ice cream with it.
It's a pavement princess.
It's a pavement princess, yeah. But I understand why you would buy this. This is for someone buying it, not interested in cars at all. Car is just simply a device that moves you from point A to point B.
A car with 7 seats, has an easy automatic gearbox, where driving's a lot easier, requires less effort. Yeah. An interior that's modern.
Yeah, it's relatively modern, yeah.
It's up to date.
Okay, it's an old dashboard design, but they've modified it a bit. They've made it look a bit better.
A car with, again, plenty of room for children.
Reasonable headroom, reasonable legroom, which the interior accommodation isn't too bad. The seats are a little hard, but in terms of interior accommodation, it's pretty good for what it is. If this second-hand was $28,000, which is what it would have been 4 or 5 years ago, 2-year-old Outlander, not a bad idea. Balance of the warranty, it's not a bad idea. Given what it's worth now, nah, wouldn't do it.
Yeah, and unfortunately that's probably the case with a lot of cars.
Yeah, given what they're worth now.
A lot of cars with 10, 20 to 50,000 kilometers.
I'd go lucky. I'd rather go lucky dip. Shitbox lucky dip. What do you come out with? But again, and I'd also think, is it really that much better than the one we have, the older ones? I don't think it is. The older cars, in my eyes, I'd rather if I had the keys to this and the red car, which is now sold and is serving someone very, very well, I'd take the red car's keys.
Yeah, same here.
The red car's interesting.
Yeah.
The red car did something for Mitsubishi.
Even looks-wise, it sticks out. That front.
Yeah, it's a great looking car. Even after all these years, it still looks great. Actually, I wanted an Outlander. I'll tell you what I would do. I'd buy the Japanese Airtrek Turbo with the Evo engine in it. You can pick one of them up, land it here, 15 grand. Even though it's automatic only, that doesn't matter. It's an Evo engine in an Outlander. I'd buy that.